everybody, it's Felisa, and this is going to be another entry for Spotlight Sunday where I spotlight a missing person. Today's case is especially egregious because it highlights the case of a child that has gone missing. This information is taken directly from the charlieproject.org. It probably will be a consistent voiceover. I want to make sure that I post as many pictures and identifying information as possible so that you guys can be aware and be on the lookout for Relisha. The details of the disappearance are as follows. Relisha was last seen in Washington, D.C. in March of 2014. She was in the care of Khalil Malik Tatum at the time. For over a year, Relisha's family had been residing in a homeless shelter in the former D.C. General Hospital. It's the largest shelter in the district, housing hundreds of families and as many as 600 children. Tatum worked there as a janitor. He befriended Relisha's family, which included her mother and 3 younger brothers. He offered gifts to Relisha, including a tablet and a manicure, and spent time alone with her. Relisha called him her goddaddy. He also had contact with other young girls living at the shelter and offered them gifts of money, although he never interacted with young boys. The shelter had a strict no fraternization rule from their employees, and they were supposed to terminate anyone who broke it, but Tatum wasn't disciplined for his actions. In late February, Relisha's mother, Shamika Young, asked Tatum to care for her. She later said she wanted Relisha to be able to escape the conditions at the shelter, which was filthy, chaotic, crime-ridden, infested with vermin, and had no playground. On March 19th, social workers came to the shelter to talk to Young about Relisha's absences from Payne Elementary School, where she was a second grader. She had missed over 30 days by that time, but many of the absences had been excused because Young told the school Relisha was under the care of Dr. Tatum. On February 25th, the day Young placed Relisha in Tatum's care, she accumulated her 5th unexcused absence, and the staff at Payne's scheduled a parent-teacher conference for March 5th. Young did attend the conference, and they told her about support services to ensure Relisha's attendance at school. When she did show up for class, she was considered a quiet and well-behaved student. There were reports that Relisha was at school on March 5th and March 7th, but the last confirmed sighting of her is March 1st. On March 10th, school officials called Tatum and told him he had to provide a medical reason and documentation for Relisha's continued absences. Tatum said he was treating her for neurological problems and that he was going to discharge her by the end of the week. Relisha accumulated a further 5 unexcused absences from school, although her younger brothers continued to attend. On March 13th, she reached her 10th unexcused absence. As was required by law, the school reported the family to the Children and Family Services, CFSA, for educational neglect. CFSA did not consider it a high priority case, however, and it wasn't until March 19th that a CFSA social worker called Tatum and arranged to meet with him later that day. He didn't show up for the meeting. He left the shelter hurriedly earlier that day before the end of his shift. The social worker learned he was not really a doctor and called a child abuse hotline and the police. When the authorities asked Young where her daughter was, Young stated Relisha and Dr. Tatum were at a medical conference in the Atlanta, Georgia area. She said they left March 8th and she didn't know when they would be back, but that she talked to her as recently as March 17th. Calls to Tatum's cell phone went directly to voicemail. One of Young's relatives went to his apartment on Hay Street to see if Relisha was there, but no one was home. Young did not want to file a police report saying Relisha was safe, but the police began a missing persons investigation. Investigators believe Tatum shot his wife to death that night or early the next morning. They had been in the process of a divorce. Her body was found in a motel room in Oxon Hill, Maryland. Tatum and Relisha were both gone. Authorities began searching for them, both in earnest, and they believe Relisha was in great danger. Tatum was already wanted on a charge of car theft, and after his wife's body was found, he additionally was charged with murder. He had been arrested multiple times before breaking and entering. but his only prior felony conviction had been for larceny decades earlier. Police learned that on March 1st, Tatum bought a box of 42-gallon trash bags and some lime, which can be used to speed up decomposition. They stated that they believed that he had murdered the child. On March 31st, police found Tatum's body at Kenilworth Park and Aquatic Gardens. He had shot himself with the same gun he used to kill his wife. There was still no sign of Relisha, and the police stopped searching the park a few days later. Lawmakers and the public criticized CFSA for failing to act sooner on Relisha's school absences and failing to remove her and her siblings from an abusive situation. The agency at first had contact with Young when Relisha was a year old, and CFSA workers learned Young's children weren't being fed adequately. Their home environment was filthy, and Relisha may have been physically abused. In 2010, social workers further discovered that Young had medically neglected one of her children, and she left them unsupervised in an environmentally safe condition. Young herself had grown up in the foster care system from the age of 9, as her father was not a part of her life and her mother has a substance abuse problem. She had been diagnosed with a mild mental disability and spent time in psychiatric residential treatment facilities as an adolescent. The complaints against Young prior to Relisha's disappearance were all eventually dropped, and her children weren't removed from her custody until after Relisha disappeared. Relisha's brothers were then placed in foster care with a goal of eventually reuniting them with their parents. Young's current boyfriend is the father of the 2 younger boys. Another man, Relisha Rudd, is the father of Relisha and her older brother. In 2012, he filed for sole custody of his 2 children, but he has only been allowed visitation. Irving was convicted of involuntary manslaughter in 1992 and sentenced to 15 years in prison. The victim in that case was his own 17-month-old daughter. He was released in 2002 and has not been rearrested. Young was investigated by a grand jury for possible obstruction of justice charges because of her inconsistent statements about her daughter's whereabouts. But in the end, no indictments were issued. The city of Washington investigated the events that led to Relisha's disappearance and concluded that there was nothing more that either CFSA or Payne Elementary School could have reasonably done, and no justifiable government actions would have prevented Relisha's tragic disappearance. She remains missing, and many authorities involved in the search for her believe that she is dead. The Washington, D.C. City Council voted to close the D.C. General Hospital shelter by 2018 and create 8 smaller shelters to replace it. The shelter did not close until 2019, however, and several of the replacement shelters have not opened yet. So I have a few thoughts about this case. This case is just disturbing all the way around. You know, it really is my contention that long before it was on the radar of the school, Relisha was already missing. You know, there's just several holes in the story, you know, and I will acknowledge the mother's mental deficits, her developmental delays, as it were, and also the impact of growing up in the foster care system. I'm not quite sure, you know, what type of foster parents she had, you know, what kind of upbringing she actually had. You know, she may have been left to her own devices, and that coupled with, you know, this mental delay or, you know, what have you, prevents her from being able to think proactively and think rationally as it pertains to the safety and the care of her children. However, you know, it was not until March 19th that social workers came to the shelter to talk with the mom about Relisha's absences, but Relisha had been absent chronically for days prior to that. So I'm not quite sure what the trigger was, like how many days you had to be absent. I know that I read that there was like 5, but were there 5 consecutive days? Was it 5, you know, just days period? You know, how long was she, you know, absent? If they didn't get there until March the 19th, but we know that on February 25th was the day that she placed Relisha in Tatum's care. and by that time she was already on her 5th absence, which meant that she had been absent since February the 20th, if we are going to say that consecutive absences is the litmus test. And so they scheduled the parent-teacher conference for March 5th, but, she still didn't, even though she went to the conference, the child still did not report to school until a couple of days later. And then when she did, she was just, quiet, and she really wasn't a problem. Now, they did say that she was at school on March 5th and March 7th, so I'm going to go out on a limb and say that perhaps March 5th was a Friday and March 7th was a Monday. But those reports are sketchy at best. The last confirmed sighting for her was March the 1st. So February 28th, she accumulated her 5th absence. The conference was March 5th. Her last known sighting was March 1st. We're going to pretend like she wasn't there the 2nd through the 4th, even if she was there on the 5th and the 7th, which would have been a Friday and a Monday, maybe, because I don't have a calendar. She just vanished after that Monday. Worst case scenario was that she hadn't been seen for a week prior. So she had already been gone, what was that, 18 days, almost 3 weeks before the social workers came to the shelter to even talk to the mom about her absence. So those timelines just don't really make sense unless I'm misreading that. And then the school officials, first of all, she lied and said that this janitor was some kind of physician. She put Relisha in the care of this Tatum. So, let's play devil's advocate for a minute. Let's say that she's of mental or limited mental cognition and mental development. And so she really believed that this was, a kindly gentleman who just wanted to help her with her child. Perhaps I have never lived in a shelter. I've never been homeless. I don't know what that feels like. I can't even imagine what it must feel like to have to, I've lost a house before to foreclosure. But, I've never had to, be homeless for stretches of time where I'm taking 4 children into a shelter environment and trying to figure out what my next steps are. So, it may have been possible that given her limited ability for cognition that, this man befriended her, made her feel like, hey, I can help you with this one. This is one less child that you have to deal with. Just let me help you. And she may have welcomed the opportunity to have some assistance. And, it may not have occurred to her if she didn't know, or, perhaps she just wasn't thinking like that, because again, I want to make sure that I'm stressing her limitations mentally. It may not have been on her radar to say, hey, this is creepy and weird that this guy is taking interest in my young daughter and, wanting to buy her things and provide her with things. And, she's the only one that he's interested in. And my boys, pretty much are kind of left to their own devices. Not only that, but he's gone through the whole shelter and he only befriends these girls. He only wants to be involved with these girls. So, I do want to make sure that I bring kind of like that balance. That could be the case. And then it also could just be a case of just parental negligence. It could be a case of, this mom is tired. She has had it. She's in the shelter. Here comes this guy that wants to, take care of her daughter. And God bless him, she's going to let him do that. I don't want to go past that because anything else is speculation. And I think that is disingenuous and it's harmful to get into matters of speculation, especially when you have someone missing and especially when you have a child missing. And you can drift very far into disparagement and, really calling into question a parent, particularly a mother. So I try and stay away from that. Although, in my head, as a parent, as a mother, I can't even imagine, like, there's no way. But again, my circumstances are not the same. My life experience is not the same. My thought process is not the same. And certainly, the way that I orient myself to parenting is not the same. I don't know what this woman has been through, and I don't know what her orientation is to parenting and or the situation she found herself in with these 4 children. The idea that, this man was probably, had some nefarious intent as it pertains to kind of grooming this little girl and giving her gifts. I think that that's classic. Every time we've heard about molestation and child sexual abuse, it always starts with some kind of grooming, whether it's, getting the child accustomed to gifts, lavish gifts, access to certain things, permissions, you take them on trips, you buy them certain things, you spoil them, you get them accustomed to trusting you, and then you introduce the sexual element. That's always, something that parents have to be cognizant of. No, it does not mean that everyone that comes into your child's life and wants to bless them and enrich them and things like that have intent on, grooming them for sexual deviation. No, not at all. And I don't want to suggest that. But as parents, we have to be so diligent and we have to be so cognizant of anyone that takes an interest in our children, boys and girls. There's no one gender that is, more precious than the other. And I do think that a lot of times we focus a lot of times on the girls for obvious reasons, and the boys are just kind of out here, and we don't realize that it damages them. Case in point, I don't want to deviate, but they just come to mind. Corey Feldman and Corey Haim. I think Corey Haim's story is especially tragic. I just remember watching interviews with him, and him struggling even in adulthood, trying to come to grips with the abuse that he had suffered. He just was never right. And, those are things that stick with you. And as someone who is a survivor of childhood molestation, it just, having that as part of your DNA, it's forever coded for you. And it's a terrible injustice to a child. And so as parents, we have to be diligent and almost hyper vigilant about anyone that comes into our children's lives that may not have the best of intent. Anyway, moving on from that, there were some, like I said, there were some complaints against Young prior to Relisha's disappearance, but they were eventually dropped, and the remaining children weren't removed from her custody until after Relisha disappeared. I'm not quite sure why the removal happened after Relisha disappeared, except, probably to kind of surmise and to guess that, a judge probably thought, well, you trusted this person with your child, and now she's missing. We don't know where she is. You probably did not make the best decision for her. So, it just becomes kind of like this never-ending cycle where not just the mom was in foster care, now the children are now having to go through the same broken system that the mother had to go through. I don't know, beyond changing some of the structure and, creating some additional support services, how we can shore this up, how can we protect children. I do know that whatever happens to Relisha, she did not deserve this. She was an innocent in all of this, probably very trusting, still having her childlike innocence intact. Like I said, she called this Tatum person her godfather. She was 8 years old, and truth be told, all things being equal, she probably was still believing in the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus, as she should, and watching cartoons and thinking about spelling contests and what she was going to do in the third grade. I do want to make sure that I add these additional elements to kind of help understand the last moments of the last sighting of her. So the classification for her case is a non-family abduction. She's missing from Washington, D.C. She's been missing since March the 1st, 2014, so she's been gone 5 years. At the time of her disappearance, she was 8. Her date of birth is October 29th, 2015, and she would be 13 years old. At the time of her disappearance, she was 4 feet and weighed 80 pounds. Her last known clothing articles and jewelry description was possibly a purple Helly Hansen winter jacket and pink boots. There's no further description about the clothing that she may have worn. And then they're saying that, medical conditions, she may be in need of medical attention for unspecified reasons. And her distinguishing characteristics is that she's an African American female, black hair, brown eyes, and some agencies spell her name as her middle name as Tinau, and her nickname is Lil Mama. Whatever happened to Relisha, I pray that she is reunited with her family and that her family receives closure. I'm so sorry that this princess may have endured unspeakable trauma and unspeakable conditions. She's a beautiful little girl. And I just ask that, you all keep an eye out, and hopefully we'll be able to bring Relisha home. Y'all have a wonderful Sunday. Bye.